Chapter 6 of The Once and Future King by T.H. White. One Thursday afternoon, the boys were doing their archery as usual. There were 2 straw targets 50 yards apart, and when they had shot their arrows at the one, they had only to go to it, collect them, and fire back at the other, facing about. It was still the loveliest summer weather, and there had been chickens for dinner, so that Merlin had gone off to the edge of their shooting ground and sat down under a tree. What with the warmth and the chickens and the cream he had poured over his pudding, and the continual repassing of the boys, and the talk of the arrows and their targets, which was as sleepy to listen to as the noise of a lawnmower, and the dance of the egg-shaped sunspots between the leaves of his tree, the aged magician was soon fast asleep. Archery was a serious occupation in those days. It had not yet been relegated to Indians and small boys, so that when you were shooting badly, you got into a bad temper, just as the wealthy pheasant hunters do today. Kay was shooting badly. He was trying too hard, plucking on his loose instead of leaving it to the bow. "Oh, come on, "Oh, come on," said Kay. "I'm sick of these beastly targets. Let's have a shot at the popinjay." They left the targets and had several shots at the popinjay, which was a large, bright-colored artificial bird stuck out of the top of a stick like a parrot, and Kay missed these also. First, he had the feeling of, "Well, I will hit the filthy thing, even if I have to go without my tea until I do it." Then he merely became bored. The wart said, "Let's play rovers, then. We can come back in half an hour and wake Merlin up." What they called rovers consisted in going for a walk with their bows and shooting 1 arrow each at the agreed mark which they came across. Sometimes it would be a molehill, sometimes a clump of rushes, sometimes a big thistle almost at their feet. They varied the distance at which they chose these objects, sometimes picking a target as much as 120 yards away, which was about as far as these boys' bows could carry, and sometimes having to aim actually below a close thistle because the arrow always leaps up a foot or 2 as it leaves the bow. They counted 5 for a hit, and 1 if the arrow was within a bow's length, and added up their scores at the end. On this Thursday they chose their targets wisely, and besides, the grass of the big field had been lately cut, so they never had to search for their arrows for long, which nearly always happens, as in golf, if you shoot ill-advisedly near hedges or in rough places. The result was that they strayed further than usual and found themselves near the edge of the savage forest where Cully had been lost. "I vote," said Kay, that we go to those berries in the chase, and see if we can get a rabbit. It would be more fun than shooting at these hummocks." They did this. They chose 2 trees about 100 yards apart, and each boy stood under one of them, waiting for the conies to come out again. They stood very still with their bows already raised and arrows fitted, so that they would make the least possible movement to disturb the creatures when they did appear. It was not difficult for either of them to stand this. For the very first test which they had to pass in archery was standing with the bow at arm's length for half an hour. They had 6 arrows each, and would have been able to fire and mark them all before they needed to frighten the rabbits back by walking about to collect. An arrow does not make enough noise to upset more than the particular rabbit that it is shot at. At the 5th shot, Kay was lucky. He allowed just the right amount for wind and distance, and his point took a young coney square in the head. It had been standing up on end to look at him, wondering what he was. "Oh, well shot!" cried the wart, as they ran to pick it up. It was the first rabbit they had ever hit, and luckily they had killed it dead. When they had carried it gutted with a little hunting knife, which Merlin had given in order to keep it fresh, and passed one of its hind legs through the other at the hock for convenience in carrying, the 2 boys prepared to go home with their prize. But before they unstrung their bows, they used to observe a ceremony. Sorry, let me say that one more time. But before they unstrung their bows, they used to observe a ceremony. Every Thursday afternoon, after the last serious arrow had been fired, they were allowed to fit 1 more knock in their strings and to discharge the arrow straight up into the air. It was partly a gesture of farewell, partly of triumph, and it was beautiful. They did it now as a salute to their first prey. The wart watched his arrow go up, The sun was already westing toward the evening, and the trees where they had plunged them into a partial shade. So as the arrow topped the trees and climbed into the sunlight, it began to burn against the evening like the sun itself. Up and up it went, not weaving as it would have done with a snatching loose, but soaring, swimming, aspiring toward heaven, steady, golden, and superb, just as it had spent its force, just as its ambition had been dimmed by destiny, and it was preparing to faint, to turn over, to pour back into the bosom of its Mother Earth. A terrible portent happened. A gore-crow came flapping wearily before the approaching night. It came, it did not waver, it took the arrow, it flew away, heavy and hoisting, with the arrow in its beak. Kay was frightened by this, but the wart was furious. He had loved his arrow's movement, its burning ambition in the sunlight. And besides, it was his best arrow. It was the only one which was perfectly balanced, sharp, tight-feathered, clean nocked, and neither warped nor scraped. "It was a witch," said Kay. "I don't care if it was 10 witches," said the wart. "I am going to get it back." "But it went toward the forest." "I shall go after it." "You can go alone, then," said Kay. "I'm not going into the forests of Oz just for a putrid arrow." "I shall go alone." "Oh, well," said Kay, "I suppose I shall have to come too if you're so set on it, and I bet we'll get nobbled up by what?" "Just let him nobble," said the wart. "I want my arrow." They went in the forest, at the place where they had seen the bird of carrion. In less than 5 minutes they were in a clearing with a well and a cottage just like Merlin's. "Goodness," said Kay, "I never knew there were any cottages so close. I say let's go back." "I just want to look at this place," said the wart. "It's probably a wizard's." The cottage had a brass plate screwed on the garden gate. It said, "Madam Mim, B.A., Dom Daniel. Pianoforte, needlework, necromancy. No hawkers, circulars, or income tax. Beware the dragon." The cottage had lace curtains. These stirred ever so slightly, as behind them there was a lady peeping. For behind them there was a lady peeping. The gore-crow was standing on the chimney. "Come on," said Kay. "Oh, come on, I tell you, she'll never give it back." At this point, the door of the cottage opened suddenly, and the witch was revealed standing in the passage. She was a strikingly beautiful woman of about 30, with coal-black hair, so rich that it had the blue black of maggot pies in it, silky bright eyes, and a general soft air of butter wouldn't melt in my mouth. She was sly. "How do you do, my dears?" said Madam Mim. "And what can I do for you today?" The boys took off their leather caps, and Wart said, "Please, there is a crow sitting on your chimney, and I think it has stolen one of my arrows." "Precisely," said Madam Mim. "I have the arrow within." "Could I have it back, please?" "Inevitably," said Madam Mim. "The young gentleman shall have his arrow in the very instant, in 4 ticks, and ere the bat squawks thrice." "Thank you very much," said the wart. "Step forward," said Madam Mim. "Honor the threshold. Accept the humble hospitality in the spirit in which it is given." "I really do not think we can stay," said the wart politely. "I think we must go. We shall be expected back at home." "Sweet expectation," replied Madam Mim, in devout tones. "Yet you would have thought," she added, "that the young gentleman could have found time to honor a poor cottage out of politeness. Few can believe how we ignoble tenants of the lower classes value a visit from the landlord's sons." "We would like to come in," said the wart, "very much, but you see we shall be late already." The lady now began to give a sort of simpering whine. "The fare is lowly," she said. "No doubt it is not what you would be accustomed to eating, and such naturally high-born ones would not care to partake." Kay's strongly developed feelings for good form gave way at this. He was an aristocratic boy, always, and condescended to his inferiors so that they could admire him. Even at the risk of visiting a witch, he was not going to have it said that he had refused to eat a tenant's food because it was too humble. "Come on, Wart," he said. "We needn't be back before Vespers." Madame Mim swept them a low curtsy as they crossed the threshold. Then she took them each by the scruff of the neck, lifted them right off the ground with her strong gypsy arms, and shot out the back door with them almost before they had got in at the front. The wart caught a hurried glimpse of her parlor and kitchen, the lace curtains, the aspidistra, the lithograph called the Virgin's Choice, the printed text of the Lord's Prayer written backwards and hung upside down, the seashell and needle case in the shape of a heart with a present from Camelot written on it, the broomsticks, the cauldrons, the bottles of dandelion wine. Then they were kicking and struggling in the backyard. "We thought that the growing sportsman would care to examine our rabbits," said Madame Mim. There was indeed a large row of rabbit hutches in front of them, but they were empty of rabbits. In one hutch there was a poor ragged old eagle owl, evidently quite miserable and neglected. In another, a small boy unknown to them, a Whitehall a Whittle who could only roll his eyes and burble when the witch came near. In a third there was a molting black cock. A fourth had a mangy goat in it, also black, and two more stood empty. "Grizzle, greedy guts," called the witch. "Here, mother," answered the carrion crow. With a flop and a squawk, it was sitting beside them, its hairy black beak cocked to one side. It was the witch's familiar. "Open the doors," commanded Madame Mim, "and Greedy Guts shall have eyes for supper, round and blue." The Gore Crow hastened to obey, and with every sign of satisfaction, and pulled back the heavy doors in its strong beak, with 3 times 3. Then the two boys were thrust inside, one into each hutch, and Madame Mim regarded them with unmixed pleasure. The doors had magic locks on them, and the witch had made them open by whispering in the keyholes. "As a nice a brace of young gentlemen," said the witch, "as ever stewed or roast, fattened on real butcher's meat, I dare say, with milk and all. Now we'll have the big one jugged for Sunday, if I can get a bit of wine to go in the pot, and the little one we'll have on the moon's morn, by Jing and G, for how can I keep my sharp fork out of him a minute longer? It fair gives me the croup." "Let me out," said Kay hoarsely. "You old witch, or Sir Ector will come for you." At this, Madame Mim could no longer contain her joy. "Hark, the little varmint!" she cried, snapping her fingers and doing a bouncing jig before the cages. "Hark to the sweet, audacious, tender little veal! He answers back and threatens us with Sir Ector on the very brink of the pot. That's how I fate to tooth him. That's how I fate to tooth them, I do declare. That's how I will tooth them ere the week be out. By Scaramilingorn, Belial, Peor, Siranto, Sanato, and Dr. D." With this she began bustling about in the backyard, the herb garden and the scullery, cleaning pots, gathering plants for the stuffing, sharpening knives and cleavers, boiling water, skipping for joy, licking her greedy lips, saying spells, braiding her night black hair, and singing as she worked. And we will pause there and begin with Madame Mim's song in the next video.